Okay, well, welcome everybody to our second webinar in a series here with regards to cyber insurance, cyber events, what employers need to know how to protect themselves, what to expect when a cyber event occurs, which is today's topic. And then our third one in a couple weeks is on understanding your cyber insurance program. I am David Lang. And joined today is John Eunice and Brett Creasy. So there we go. We're going to go, today's agenda is going to deal with what you need to understand and what to expect relating to when you have an event occur. Some of these are going to be unfamiliar or even not fathomable by most people in terms of what to expect. So we do want to make sure that you have some semblance of an idea as to what you may need to deal with so that when it occurs, the processes that you're going to have to go through, the steps you have to take, what's going to happen, make a little bit more sense to you. Over the last couple of years, after seeing and how insurance claims have played out with cyber, we've determined that it's not your normal insurance. So it's best to know exactly what to expect ahead of time. Like I said, so we had John, who is the CEO of Bit by Bit. For those that were not on the first one, I met the gentleman from Bit by Bit actually taking care of one of our clients that had a ransomware attack. They went in, found out that the steps that our client had started to do to reinstall their systems from viable backups. Turned out that the IT firm did not do what they were supposed to do, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we also have Brett, who is, there we go, president and runs their forensics. He's the one that dug into our clients' computer systems and figured out what exactly was stolen out of their computer system, even though they did not think something was stolen. Obviously, then myself, whoops. So with that, let's start digging into this, gentlemen, for today. And I like to kick it off because cyber insurance is unlike any other insurance policy that you may think of. If you own a building, businesses can comprehend if I have a broken pipe, my pipe froze, water's going everywhere, what do? You shut off the water, you start trying to clean it up, you try to mitigate it, try to deal with what you can, and then you call the insurance company. You may even call a disaster restoration company to come in and start doing some cleaning for you, but then you file your claim. When it comes to cyber insurance, your duties as an insured are different than they are on a property policy, on a liability policy. Your duty as an insured in your property policy is to mitigate what's going on and then reasonably file the claim when expected. And they will help adjust it afterwards. In cyber insurance, there is no such thing as apples to apples insurance. There is no standard process. Every insurance policy is completely different. And we'll discuss that even more in detail in the third series of this. But the duties of an insured are outlined in your policy, and they may run counterintuitive to what you may realize. As a business owner, if your computer system is down, it affects your business, you need to get up and running. And what you may not realize is restoring your computer system from backups, getting up and running, having somebody spend all this time and money to get your system up and running and then sending a bill to the insurance company, they may say, no, thank you, we're not paying that. Because your duties as an insured was to file the claim immediately and go through their services, their providers. Others, insurance companies may say, if it's just damage to your system, you have a certain time frame to deal with it and try to correct it before you have to notify us. Some you have to tell them, if you need to sneeze and wipe your nose. It's literally depends on the insurance company. So we've actually seen employers have a ransomware attack, have an email hack, have different things that even though we put it on the cover sheet, we've told them, with their policy, they opened up, they called the number over the weekend, particularly this one, and did not see that they should have turned the claim in immediately. They waited until their IT company went to fix things. And then not only that, but later on, when the virus rehatched itself, so to speak, they found out that their IT firm did not clean the system appropriately. So it's important to understand your role in the policy. And then the last thing, unlike a property policy where you have an adjuster and the adjuster says, okay, send us the bills, they review it, this is legitimate, we'll pay it. You're going to have another person in this, and it's going to be what they call a breach coach. Most of the time, these breach coaches are even attorneys. The reason being is they're going to walk you through it, and your breach coach, if you need somebody to investigate your system like Brett, dig and understand what occurred, what data was in there, if there was personal identifiable information stolen, he wants to capture that and get that communication because you have this thing called attorney-client privilege. So the breach coach is hopefully and it usually is an attorney that has gone through this process numerous times with other employers, is going to be able to pull in, drag in the appropriate resources, people, investigators, what you need to do. If you, who do you need to notify? When do you need to notify? All of that stuff comes through the breach coach. So a lot of this is going to be directed by your insurance company and that breach coach as to what you need to do, so that ultimately everything gets taken care of, you're back in business, and hopefully, retaining all your customers and moving forward, and it doesn't happen again. Any thoughts, gentlemen, on what you've seen in that process that has surprised some of the employers that you've worked with?
Yeah, I'll jump in there, David. I think, to your point about the timing of things and the involvement of a breach coach is really, at the end of the day, think of that person as your quarterback throughout the process, often, lining up resources, getting other attorneys involved that may actually be the ones who are looking at the data that, somebody like my team is gathering and presenting to them so that they can make, a legal determination of whether or not each little individualized event constitutes an actual breach, which we'll get into a little bit of what that means in just a second here. But it is often counterintuitive, I think, as you pointed out, David, where sometimes you have to pause and make sure that you have the process down, and who's going to be involved in it before you just start fixing things, even though that's what everybody wants to do. They just want to get it fixed and move on with life. But doing so can harm the investigation. It can result in, you footing the bill entirely yourself. So it's important to understand those steps.
Yeah, and along that lines, one of the client that I met them on, they got the screen that said, "Hey, congratulations, you have been, your systems have been locked up. You won the lottery thing." But they were given an account number, an email address, and how much to pay in Bitcoin. The customer had basically, they felt viable backups, and their IT firm was in the process of restoring it when the customer finally called us and said, "Hey, by the way, a couple days ago we had this event. We're probably 90% finished restoring." And I said, "Well, can you send me a screenshot?" They sent me the screenshot, and it said, "If you don't pay, we're going to release information." And I said, "Well, what information did they take? And they said, oh, our IT firm said, don't worry about that. They always say that because they feel like you have to pay even when you got good backups. And I said, okay, but how do you know? How do you know? That's when John and Brett's team went in there and found out they stole what, 250 gigabytes of data on the same server that had the employee records. Fortunately, they identified that none of the files taken by the time the system was shut off from the perpetrators by our client was employee information. It was not sensitive information, so they did not have to do notifications, and it didn't constitute a breach of information. But we've had other clients where it has, and that's where that breach coach and this process goes into play, that they would have known that they still had to do the investigation because that's required under federal or state laws, depending upon what occurs. And not only that, but they also probably, their IT firm probably would have been instructed on properly cleaning the machines before reinstalling the software, as Brett pointed out, because the virus was already running in like 60, 70% of the machines that were cleaned. So that's why you need to have somebody that knows this process, has the experience to walk you through it.
And David, one other comment there on the last point about, you mentioned attorney-client privilege. So depending on the organization, of course, and the type of data it has access to and that it stores, there could be, and we'll talk later about this, legal liability for notifying individuals whose data has been accessed, or maybe follow-on litigation. So it's always important to talk to your carrier about whether or not that coach is indeed an attorney. The attorney-client privilege is a doctrine that protects from disclosure from outside parties any information exchanged between an attorney and his or her client when the goal is providing legal advice. So that means the client's asking questions of a lawyer, the lawyer is giving guidance in response to those questions, and it's a legal topic. That communication surrounding that information exchange is protected from third parties, maybe future plaintiffs. So that's why it's an important thing to ask about the qualifications of the breach coach, whether they have an ESQ after their name and what their background is.
Okay. John Michael, if you could go back a slide. But the, yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to is protecting you from a liability standpoint, as well as making sure that your best interests are taken care of. We've actually seen a couple cases where IT firms, I don't want to use the word complicit, but it was determined that the IT firm did not have the appropriate updates, well, up to date. And that we've seen IT firms try to cover their trail. So sometimes it's better to have that third party come in and look at your system than your own IT firm. That way, if let's say there are things that are not recoverable by insurance and you need to take your own legal action, they didn't clean the system to the point where you have no evidence that maybe your IT firm was partially at fault or fully at fault for the breach. So let's dig into some of the scenarios that they may experience, gentlemen. Let's start with the one that's all in the news. Seems like almost every day, but yet, believe it or not, is not actually that common. So what are your thoughts there, Brett?
Yeah, so the elephant in the room, so to speak, ransomware, right? As you mentioned, it's the thing that everyone hears about in the news. But just to throw some kind of numbers out there and put it into context a little bit, Verizon puts out a large data breach report every year that covers hundreds of thousands of security incidents. And of those, I think last year is over 150,000 that they analyzed that are submitted by dozens of organizations like ours to Verizon, anonymized data, of course. Of that over 150,000, roughly 3,900 involved malware. So some sort of malicious code, designed to, we'll call it, take bad acts against businesses and individuals. And well, I actually take that back. 3,900 of those were actual breaches. So if there's breaches, mean, right, in the legal world, that there was actually, some legal duty for the entity to take action on, right? It was some sort of theft or access of protected information of some sort. There's 3,900, only 17% involve malware. And ransomware isn't even the top type of malware that's used in hacks and breaches. It's number 3 behind password scrapers and other things. So to say it's super common, yes and no. I would say more so no, if you're just looking purely numbers, but that then raises the question, why is it so commonly talked about? And the answer there, I think, is impact, right? It's the same reason why, a shooting that results in a death makes the news and a fight outside the bar does. It's the impact that garners attention. It's the high dollar amount that gets associated with ransomware attacks, in terms of, when the businesses have to pay. So understanding what it is and how to protect yourself from it, of course, is very important. That's why we're covering the topic today. Ransomware being kind of a in-your-face attack, right? David mentioned their earlier story about, the screen pop-up that says, hey, your data has been encrypted and here's payment instructions. And, by the way, if you don't pay, we're going to release your information kind of details. There's no, not noticing ransom. It's not like other attacks that can, kind of just hide in the shadows, so to speak. It's designed to get your attention so that you pay. And so the way that usually occurs, right, is ransomware isn't the attack vector. It isn't, the attack in its entirety. It's often the end goal or it's the parting gift. Ransomware has kind of evolved over time where, I would say in years gone by, a lot of ransomware was kind of your, we'll call it drive-by attack, right? If you can get an individual to click on a bad link, or if there's a vulnerable system that, ransomware can be executed on it, the bad actors would take advantage of that, and ransomware is right there in your face seeking payment. Today, I would say more often than not, ransomware is the thing that gets left behind after they've already breached the network, after they've already stolen data, as in our earlier example. What made, David's client reach out was the ransomware piece of it, right? Because it was the in your face piece of it. And he rightfully questioned about, well, what about this language about releasing your information, right? Doesn't that suggest that they stole something? That is the common tactic, right? Is rifling around your computer systems, your accounts, finding what's valuable, taking it if they can, kind of maybe a parallel track to setting up systems for ransomware, right, for further access. And so, it's important to kind of understand that, it's not just the ransom event itself that you have to deal with, but it's also the kind of earlier stages of the attack, which brings us into these other categories that we have listed here. Business email compromise or phishing. I think, most folks are probably familiar at some level with what that might be. But that is an area where it's often, the entry point into the systems. And so that's another kind of tactic that, you can take steps to shut down. There are, I'll call it technical controls that can be put in place through most email servers to do kind of additional security scanning of links and attachments and things for, malicious content. There's also ways to kind of protect we'll call it reputation of senders and recipients of email. It's called DKIM. It might be something to talk to your IT person about. But it's basically a way of, securing your system so that the outside world knows that emails coming from you really came from your email server and vice versa. So that if somebody is, pretending to spoof, maybe a client or another business that you do business with, if that email isn't really coming from their actual email server, it'll get rejected. And so there's some technical ways to kind of tighten the net as it relates to email, but then there's some softer things as well, right? There are security awareness training, of course, that teach people how to spot phishing emails. It's not always the Prince in Nigeria offering $1 million these days. They're very targeted, crafted emails that are targeting individuals in your business. And then, of course, MFA, multi-factor authentication. I think we've touched on this perhaps even in our last talk, but I can't beat that drum enough. Literally every business email compromise that we've responded to could have been thwarted by having MFA in place. So it's a technology whereby you have a username and password to log into your email account, through the website or what have you. But in addition to that, you also get a timed security code. Most often that comes over via text message or perhaps on an app on your phone that's constantly rotating. But that extra form there is a big hurdle for outsiders to then get into your email system. So can't pump the value of that one enough.
And before I forget, if anybody has questions, don't forget to put it in the chat box. We'll address it as we go or at the end. But yeah, email seems to be the one that we see most often. It is, think of how many times you've had somebody send you an email that says, hey, by the way, my email was hacked, disregard all the previous emails. And and it's not the ones where, hey, I'm stuck out of the country and I need Google Play cards. Although we have had people that got duped by those. And that's tells you how often it occurs and why the reason why Brett's saying you have to put controls and multi-factor in place. But imagine what would happen if I was reading an article about a law firm that had somebody basically cloned their email server or something like that. They got into their email, had their password, and for 6 months just sat there and was gathering data on all their customers. That's a lot of information to have released. And I think this attorney, from what I've read, sounds like they went out of business over it. But we've also seen customers that have had emails. The perpetrators send out emails to change how you collect your invoices from your customers. That's invoice manipulation. We've seen that. We've seen all kinds of things with regards to what happens with emails, and one of the main reasons why you need to protect it.
David, I also want to maybe sticking on that theme for a second, just walk folks through what to maybe expect in those scenarios, which we've seen the good and the bad in terms of responses to those situations.
Yes. So from a control system, we talked about the multi-factor. The other side, as you alluded to, is training. Making sure that you're providing training to your employees so that they understand how to look out for phishing. A lot of times they're trying to get you to click a link that may have a key logging virus or something like that, something to captures those passwords, and they can get into various accounts. But we had one client that over the course of the week was sending out invoices, and then on a Friday they get a call from one of their customers, says, hey, we're not really set up to pay by EFT. Can we still send you a check this time? We'll hopefully next time be ready to send you payment online. And my client's like, what are you talking about? It turned out that they were in their email system for weeks, and as they were sending out invoices, they were recalling them and sending new emails with instructions, not just the legitimate invoice, but instructions on how to pay by EFT. And if they couldn't recall them, they sent another email with the instructions. Oh, by the way, we're no longer taking checks. And then since the email is cloned, it's like if you have the email on your desktop, you have your email on your phone. If you delete it on your phone, it's deleted on your desktop. So they were cleaning up the system. So the person that was, the financial controller at this company did not realize this was all occurring. And so they started calling around, and some of their, quite a number of their clients already paid the perpetrators, and they clawed some money back, but when it was all said and done, we had to pay out about $70,000 out of their cyber program to cover the losses that they could not recover. So that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's something to be aware of, that, if you, anytime something changes, any customer wants to get paid differently, you should pick up the phone and call the phone number that's, for lack of a term, in your Rolodex, in your phone, not the number that's on the email or on the invoice that you receive. Pick it up, call the person and have a conversation and make sure that the change is legit, because you may end up paying the wrong party and be out money yourself, or the other way around. And but that's something to expect, that, and one of the reasons why, if something occurs, you need to pounce on it quickly. Time is of the essence when it comes to cyber breaches, because sometimes the damage can be either undone or partially undone if you act quick enough. So the most recent invoices, they got clawed back. The ones earlier in the week, it was too late.
And on that point, David, I think it's important to understand the weeds a little bit. Certainly, where fast action can help is in this scenario, as you mentioned, because often what the bad actors are doing there, when you mentioned, they were kind of cleaning the system to monitor things and kept the financial person within the company out of the loop. When they first hop into an account, right, and they get the credentials, they log in as the user, it isn't like they're, just reading through emails typically one by one. The typical process is, if they can, they'll connect some sort of mail account or mail application like Outlook even to that account, so that they can effectively download the entire content of the account. So now, even if you figure out that somebody logged in an unauthorized way and you change the password, which is a common, IT function, somebody just changes the password and they say, okay, that's it, we locked them out, we're done. They already have all your data. So you need to, of course, have the logs saved that could help establish that, so that somebody who understands what those logs are saying can go through them and report on those details. And then additionally, step number 2, or sometimes it's step number 1 even, is, when they first connect, they set up rules behind the scenes. So automatic rules that will fire based on certain criteria. So certain people are emailing, if they compromise David's account, if somebody's sending an email to David and it has a certain subject or certain words in the email, or it contains an attachment or whatever it may be, they configure all of these rules to capture that communication, send it off to a different account, forward it off to some Gmail account or something that they're in control of, and delete it from the real account. And so what happens there is kind of what you mentioned, the observation from the end user is nothing, right? They don't see it unless they happen to literally be looking at the screen at the second that the email shows up in their inbox. But within milliseconds, that rule is firing and deleting the email and sending it off someplace else. So there's all like nitty-gritty things that I think is important to understand go on behind the scenes in these sort of events, where it's not just a simple, I'm going to reset my password and send out a couple of emails to clients to tell them to ignore it, because there could be a lot of things lurking behind the scenes.
Yeah. So then the other thing we tend to see is how they take advantage of vulnerabilities that are in systems, like we talked about in the first meeting. But obviously this turns into a numerous number of issues that they could experience on their end.
Yeah, I think vulnerable systems are still I call it an easy target for bad actors. A lot of companies, unfortunately, fail what I consider the number 1 rule, which is know thyself. They don't realize, or they don't have the processes in place to have a solid, up-to-date grasp on what systems they have and what systems are accessible from the internet. So where that comes into play often is, perhaps an older system that should have been decommissioned, wasn't fully decommissioned, and it was left online, and therefore it's maybe out of the patching cycle. And so, pretty much every system over time has vulnerabilities associated with it. That's why it's such a cat and mouse game. So things like that are left behind and accessible via the internet, or it could be a system that's designed to be accessible from the internet, and it has to be accessible from the internet, but the patching of it is lagging behind, right? It's, maybe you've got an automatic process set up. Windows updates is a common one, right? Microsoft releases patches to their operating systems and other products on a pretty regular basis. And you might have that set up to automatically download and install, but, or maybe it's only automatically downloading it. And so it takes a deliberate act by somebody to install it. And this is one of those areas I think, you mentioned earlier, where a lot of times, it's IT's job, right, to kind of keep up to date on those things, but IT doing those sort of things, as patching and updates and things, might cause business downtime, even short amounts of business downtime, but they have to reboot servers and things of that nature. And, maybe the business owners, individual departments or whatever the reporting structure there is might, cause IT to miss their schedule, right? And then IT is behind schedule, or they forget to go back. And that's where you can see where these kind of things kind of creep up on folks. But basically, the thing to remember there is to know what systems are accessible from the internet and to make decisions about what really should be or shouldn't be. I would say it's probably a pretty safe bet that most servers that a business has probably don't need to be accessible from the internet. Or if they do, you can create rules to really control what that looks like. So maybe the servers can only communicate with Microsoft's update servers for patches, and it can only communicate with the, if you have like a cloud-based antivirus provider, it's contact those servers for updates, and you can really kind of control what that access from the outside world looks like. So if the bad actor is effectively scanning and trying to inventory your public internet face, they're missing a lot of things, right? You can hide them behind the scenes, behind the firewalls and configuration. So the last thing to maybe mention in that is, even through, a lot of, great efforts and correct processes and everything, there are still going to be vulnerabilities that pop up from time to time. You hear them sometimes called 0 days. It made the news a good bit this past year, in the springtime, when Microsoft Exchange had a number of 0-day vulnerabilities, which basically means that there's an exploit out there in the wild, readily available, that bad actors can make use of, and the provider, Microsoft in this case, wasn't aware of it beforehand, and so they're playing catch up, right? And so they have to create a new fix for a hole that exists in their system. And some of those are, maybe inconvenience things. Others are very critical, like the Exchange one this past spring provided, essentially through a different chain of attacks, the ability for a remote bad actor to gain administrative access to a mail server. And so, of course, you can't roll off an email server from the internet. It's its function, right? It has to communicate with the outside world. And so there were tens of thousands of businesses around the world affected by that. And, the end result, of course, is that, the bad actor was able to directly access a server and do so with a level of access that basically gave them access to anything that they wanted. And not only then could they get to the data on the email server, they could then use that as a staging area to get to other servers within the environment. So start turning into lateral movement and, turning it into then maybe a ransomware attack, a little bit later. So those things will exist. And that's why keeping on top of, as I said, kind of know thyself, what your systems are and what the responses are going to be to lock them down are critically important.
Yeah, and some things that some business owners might not realize, with when your systems are all tied together, we've had a couple manufacturers that have had, when they've either had malware or ransomware attacks, it caused their production servers to go down, which causing them being unable to communicate to their machinery out in their shop to, make products and things like that. They didn't have access to drawings that they had to use to, so it can be very disruptive to businesses to when those occur. And that's something you need to be aware of, that when it does occur, some of your systems made that you might think are going to be affected will end up being affected. So you really want to be aware that that's going to occur. That's one of the reasons why they bring it up, but ultimately it's better to isolate those to begin with. And then the other one that we typically see, and obviously we can't cover everything here today, but the release of personal identifiable information here, this is the area that, as John was saying before, you're going to have a legal defense and be prepared. But there's also federal and state notification requirements, depending upon where you're based or where your customers are based. And sometimes these notifications are literally a few days that you're legally required to notify them. I think I know like New York's one of the tougher ones. They're 5 days, but I thought I read somewhere there was somebody that you'd have to have the notification in the mail within like 3 days for them to meet the requirements of that state from a compliance standpoint and liability standpoint of a breach. And then think about everything as you were talking about, John, what they're going to have to go through and what they're going to be responsible to do when they do have one of these personal identifiable information releases. So they're going to have to send out letters or have to offer credit monitoring services. And you're gonna have to pay for those credit monitoring services. I mean, it's what I've read anywhere from $200 or $300 per person. I mean, what are you seeing there, John?
Yeah, so it varies by state, like you said, and that underscores the importance of getting counsel involved as early as possible. And there's really two sides to that analysis. There's the actual fines that could be imposed if you don't meet the obligations. And then there could be actual civil lawsuits filed by those who are quote unquote victims of the failed notification. So you hit both ways, sort of administrative government fines, and then follow on litigation from maybe it's a customer or maybe it's a client whose data was breached and you weren't advising them properly, or they have rights under the law to sue you for remediation of that discovery.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why when I mentioned in the beginning, I asked my client, how do you know what was taken? I mean, there's actual ways, as Brett explained to me, that you can read the board on a hard drive to actually determine what files have gone on and off there to determine what was taken. Because if you assume that nothing was taken, you go and get your systems, you're back up and running, and next thing you know, you're getting served with papers because you violated the state or federal rules. You have customers that are had personal, had their identity stolen, whatnot, have damages, and you failed to notify them because so you cannot assume. That's why some of the most, a lot of times we're seeing, $40, $50, $100,000 of cyber forensics fees being paid on these claims to determine what exactly occurred, what was affected, who was affected, so that all the processes can be worked out, who needs to get notified, all that kind of stuff. And that's something for everybody to be aware of, that, and like I said, runs counterintuitive to what you want. You want to get back in business, but if you don't do these things, it will come back to bite you in the end. And that's why you want to follow that breach coach. Let's see here. There we go. So as we mentioned, you will need people like your attorneys, your experts, and things like that. So hence, I know John took good care of one of my clients with regards to that. If you want to expand on the key people that are going to be part of this.
Yeah, so I'll take maybe the first piece there, and Brett can go in on the second piece.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the lawyers that typically get involved, there are certainly a matrixed set of notification laws that could apply based on your company's profile, where your data sits, and where your customer data resides, where they reside. So it's never an easy answer, or I should say it's rarely an easy answer. So getting legal counsel with the expertise to understand the laws for notification is sort of step number one there, where lawyers can add value. Step number two is there are also attorneys that focus on insurance coverage and insurance analysis of policies. So counseling you as an insurer from a legal perspective to make sure you cooperate as an insured under the policy properly, that would then maximize your ability to recover the policy proceeds and to not have the carrier deny the claim. I think we all sort of stub our toes on that in the non-cyber world. You have a car accident and it wasn't your fault, and it seems like every excuse in the book is thrown your way as to why the carrier won't pay, even though they took your premiums gladly. So you want to have attorneys there understand the nuances of the insurance policy to make sure you cooperate properly to mitigate the chance the carrier would deny coverage. And then thirdly is litigation readiness. I mentioned earlier in my comments, there could be, depending on the company, of course, claims for either delayed notification, no notification, or an argument that the company didn't do all it should have done to protect the information in the first place and had a duty to do so, which could then lead to litigation in the civil context. So those are kind of three layers where I think lawyers can help, and having sort of attorneys' relationships established in advance is helpful. Knowing in your policy, many times there are law firms that are listed in your policy as to who can help you. If you have, you should check that policy. If you have firms you know of or attorneys you know of with that expertise that aren't on those lists, working with your broker, typically at the time of policy renewal or negotiation, not at time of breach, to have those firms added is very important. And I'll let Brett talk to the forensic expert side of things, but those are sort of three tiers to think about. It's not just an IT problem or a technical issue. It really has nuance to it. It could be legal liability, of course, insurance coverage, and then that would lead to your financial exposure, and then the notification provisions, which is a regulatory requirement. Maybe Brett, you could talk about the forensic piece a little bit as well, as far as firms that can help and how they can help.
Yeah, I mean, I think, on that piece, some of those details are what we've been going through so far, right? So the forensics firms really are designed to investigate what happened. If it's still ongoing, help shut it down. To David's point earlier, where, the IT, team, for all its, good intentions, was trying to get the business back up and running, may not fully understand the way that, attackers kind of work and where they're hiding in the nooks and crannies of a computer network. And so the last thing that you want to have happen is, to jump into a sort of cleanup phase and think you're cleaned up, and then it pops back up in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But, so that's kind of the key area there, where forensics teams are going to be involved is, evidence gathering that'll allow you to have, the details necessary to, provide to the attorneys so that they can make those determinations about notifications and things, and whether or not it truly is a quote unquote breach, through the, we'll call it business remediation phase of getting the systems back online. Often, the forensics teams are working hand in hand with IT to do those things, kind of guiding them along the way, so to speak, as to, what systems can be cleaned back up, because, they know that they've already collected the evidence for that machine, and, kind of tying the knot off, so to speak, there. And then, we'll touch on this, I think, in just a minute, but then there's also, of course, the lessons learned piece of it that the forensics team can take part of as well.
Yeah, and then the last piece is sometimes, since the information gets out into the world, cyber programs also will pay for public relations. Explaining how you've taken extra steps to properly protect information, protect the customers, take care of credit monitoring, whatever the case might be. I always like to use the example of good and bad PR. If you go back, it was probably in 2000, middle 2000s, when there was the hepatitis and the, I don't know if it was a celery or something that came over the lettuce, and people had unfortunately had died from the exposure. And it was It affected, I know, like Chi-Chi's, the restaurant Chi-Chi's, and it affected locally the convenience store chain of Sheetz's. Chi-Chi's went out of business because they did very poorly in terms of public relations explaining what they did, where Sheetz's did an excellent job pulling everything, shutting things down, cleaning. That's the thing, the difference between good and bad public relations. So you want to make sure that you have somebody that can craft and convey the story that will make and get your customers and prospective customers to understand that not only did you take care of your what needed to be done, you went above and beyond, and now you're in a better position than you were before, and now you're even more secure, and that's a good reason why you want to continue to do business with you. Whoops, John Michael, go back one, please. Oh, never mind, got it. So let's, in terms of closing this up, after the breach occurs, obviously you need to, as some of our clients have had to do, dig in and figure out what occurred, why it occurred, and what they needed to do to correct things. And in some cases, understanding, how their insurance is not just played out, but do we need to address other potential things as they go through their analysis as to, what they do and how they do things. So sometimes, we have to, also, just because you had a cyber breach does not mean that you won't get cyber insurance in the future. In some cases, some of our insurance companies, as long as you've corrected the things that may have caused the breach and you've got documentation to that, they will continue to insure you and will not, whack you like the mole in the whack-a-mole game in terms of the premium. So, but in the areas that, you also look at is trying to prevent it from happening again in the future, which is what Brett was about to get into.
Yeah, I think on that part, right? So, and it ties directly into the insurance piece, as you mentioned, David. You may still be able to get insurance again, but you may not too, right? If you stick your head in the sand and don't take corrective action, then that would definitely impact your ability to get insurance in the future. But not only that, it allows the opportunity for bad actors to come back again and again and again, right? Once you're in the target, in the crosshair, so to speak, and they know you've fallen victim to something, and maybe you jumped on it fast enough and you locked them out during their initial attack, or they sort of had a slight win, they still now know you, right? You're a known thing that they're going to target. They know the players, they know the people in your business, they know how you operate, they know what you have, and maybe the value of coming back again. And so, you can expect that, you're going to have continued attempts at your business. And so that's where, really understanding, what happened the first time around so that you can at least kind of hopefully mitigate that avenue from the future is critically important, right? If you had a business email compromise event, then you better be sure to do all the things that you can to ensure that a business email compromise event doesn't happen again. But it also sometimes is kind of that wake-up call to really look at security holistically, not just as a finite project kind of break fix thing where it was a business email compromise event. Okay, we put controls in place to take care of that, but then we didn't think about anything else. I'd say that's probably the incorrect approach. It's certainly a starting point, but what other avenues of attack might a bad actor take against your business, right? Maybe it's a vulnerable system thing that we talked about. Maybe it's doing something that isn't going to result in the loss of data, but could still harm your business through like a denial of service attack, where they just flood your systems with so much data that you can't operate. And just really kind of taking a holistic approach, looking at that. There's a lot of great frameworks out there that can guide you through that process. And, sometimes, the teams that are doing that initial response can help get you started in the right direction, right? In terms of the readiness and kind of increasing the maturity of your overall cybersecurity practice.
I'll add one comment there, Brad. We've had many occasions where we understand clients, the last thing they want to do when the breach has been remediated or the incident's been responded to is to go back and pull open the wound and relook at everything. It's stressful, it's time consuming, it's resource draining, and you want to get on with life and selling widgets and doing your business. But we've had also experience where that second look isn't given, and 6 months later we're called again to help them remediate something that could have been corrected had they just sat down and did a table talk exercise and thought through the challenges there. So we're conceding it's not easy and not obviously something that people want to do whenever they get the emergency taken care of, but it really does help mitigate. And then to David's other point, when you want to go get additional insurance coverage, for example, or new coverage or a different coverage, if you have that exercise done, that tells a carrier you're serious about it. You're going to take steps to mitigate, and that can help you on the insurance side as well. So for security, for future risk, and insurance, it's something that we really recommend clients take a pause and do if at all possible.
Yeah, so some of the things I think is, as we work to conclude this and summarize it, a lot of things that we talked about, whether it be some of the ransomware, some of the email hacks, things like that, these are not necessarily always quick. They sit there, they lurk there, they're in your system for a while. If you're not actively, proactively looking for these things to shut them down, they will build. They can determine. I know when I sat through a course put on by a former Russian hacker after he got out of prison, programming ransomware, he talked about once they have somebody in the hook because they know the program is running, they sit and wait to see what kind of data they have access to. They sit and wait and figure out how big your company is and what they think you might be able to pay. And yeah, it's not something like they just turn on the virus got in your system, they turn on the light switch and they run. They're patient people. They will sit there and wait and pounce when, well, it's most advantageous for them to do that. And that's what they do. So it's important to know. I mean, it's the same as, one of our clients that had, north of $100,000 of payroll of their employees stolen. They determined they were in the payroll system for weeks because of a key logging virus from one of the employees of our customers. And they were in the payroll system changing employee account information, adding secondary accounts or third accounts. And then between pays went and changed everybody's payroll to those second and third accounts. So the employer's payroll went out, but it went to, according to the FBI agent I was talking to, predominantly prepaid debit cards. So you have to think this is not a long-term. And by the way, they determined that the key logging virus got in because the employee was phished and clicked on something that they shouldn't have. So is it safe to say that we go back to, that's the education part of and why it's important to educate employees as to, preventing those from occurring. But anything else that you guys want to highlight before, as we continue to conclude here before we have our final webinar in this series in November?
All right, just happy to take any questions if anybody has them right now. You can submit it to the chat, or certainly, feel free to reach out afterwards if something pops up and just want to kind of cover something more on a one-on-one basis. Happy to, have a conversation and share.
And we could also put together, David, sort of a little one-pager, sort of maybe key takeaways from today, so they have it at their disposal, the folks on the phone or on the Zoom.
Yeah, just like you did from the first one. That's an excellent decision. We do have, I would suggest, based on the text I got, one of my clients is doing this on their phone. They asked what kind of, although this goes back to the preventive side, what kind of training should employees have to try to prevent some of these things. And obviously, I guess the question also relates to, what else that they should do to try to prevent it. But I think you identified that in the previous one. I don't think this client was not on our first webinar.
Yeah. Want to take that one, Brett, on our training
would be a
that
good
we
thing.
manage?
What's that?
I'm sorry to cut you off there, David, to overtalk you. I want to see if Brett wanted to describe the training we actually oversee for clients and explain how that works.
Yeah, and we could certainly follow up with that person for you, David, if you want. But basically, the best training is I'll call it repetitive training, in the sense that it's not just a one and done kind of topic thing. As tactics change and things, and making sure that people actually are paying attention and understand the training. So I would say I would typically recommend avoiding the kind of dull, one-time PowerPoint presentation training. There's a lot of great programs out there that, are not expensive, quite frankly, that offer kind of just very quick hit computer-based training modules that are kind of interactive and, test somebody's knowledge. And then, as perhaps the business owner, you can track that and see who's actually participating and paying attention, and, and engage, them through that process. So it's definitely something that can either be handled in-house. We also manage it for clients as well. So happy to talk to anybody about that.
I do not see any other questions. We got a couple thank yous already. And so with that, we will conclude and look forward to seeing everybody on November 10th.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.